let's move on to our next story. And talking about Trinidad. This is exactly what happened when Prime Minister of Trinidad, Kamala Prasad Basesa, stood before the crowd during the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar's visit, and she proudly declared, "I am proud that today a small coolie girl has become the Prime Minister of Trinidad." Well, the statement exploded globally because the word coolie, it carries painful colonial history. It was historically used in very derogatory word for laborers that were brought from India to plantation across the Caribbean, Fiji, Mauritius, and other colonies after slavery was abolished. Now, for many Indians transported under Gimitya labor system faced terrible conditions. Long contracts, harsh labor, racism. In fact, they faced poverty, cultural isolation. Some did not even fully understand the agreements that they signed because they could not read English. Yet, despite all of the struggle, Indian communities preserved the language, religion, music, and traditions across generations. In fact, Ramayana reading, Indian festivals, Bhojpuri influences, and Hindu traditions survive thousands of kilometers away from India. And that is why Trinidad's Kamala Prasad Basesa's speech resonated emotionally. She was not apologizing for her roots. She was reclaiming them very proudly. And there is another powerful reality here. Nearly 45% of Trinidad and Tobago's population today is of Indian origin. Indo-Trinidadians now play a major role in politics, business, and public life. In fact, the Prime Minister even announced plans to rename Nelson Island, a historic immigration site connected to the Indian indentured laborer, in honor of Indian ancestors after public consultation. In fact, her speech, it reminded the entire world that the Indian diaspora story, it is not just about Silicon Valley, engineers, or global CEOs. It is also a story of survival after colonial displacement. A story of people once treated as laborers, whose descendants now lead the nation. Now, let's move on from fear to hope. Because amid all the anxiety around immigration, layoff, and visas, one Indian origin businessman reminded the entire America what generosity can look like. At the graduation ceremony at North Carolina State University's Wilson College of Textiles, students expected what? Speeches, applause, celebration. But what they did not expect was financial freedom. Indian-American philanthropist Mr. Anil Kochar, he suddenly announced that he would pay off the final year students' loan of 176 graduates of 2025-26 academic year. In fact, the reaction inside that hall, that was emotional chaos. Cheers erupted. Students cried openly. Some covered their faces in disbelief. Because in America, student debt, it's not just a financial issue. It shapes the entire lives. Millions of young Americans delay buying homes, starting families, or launching businesses because of education loan. Student debt in the US, it has crossed trillions of dollars nationally. So for many graduates, debt becomes the first major burden of adulthood. And that is why Mr. Kochar's announcement, it resonated so deeply. And the story becomes even more emotional when you understand the history behind it. Mr. Kochar dedicated the gift to his father, Prakash Chand Kochar, who came from Punjab to study at the same institution in 1946. Can you think about the symbolism here? One immigrant generation arrived searching for opportunities. A decade later, the next generation became successful enough to remove financial burden for hundreds of American students. Well, ladies and gentlemen, proudly saying this is the side of Indian diaspora that often gets ignored during political immigration debates. Indian origin communities, they are now deeply embedded into American success story. Not just in technology though, but in medicine, academia, and business leadership. And in a time when immigrants are increasingly discussed through the language of restrictions and suspicion, moments like this reshape public perception, and that too very powerfully, because generosity speaks louder than politics. Now, sometimes one sentence can reopen centuries of history, right?